Hey, I'm always amazed how you can live in the same house and Brooke and I in no way communicate what we're wearing, but somehow we both wear hoodies today. I have no idea. I never wear a hoodie in public. Well, I do, but I don't. Anyway. All right, I want to share something with you today about our church. You will see out in the lobby on the wall where there's some art. There's a little shelf there, and it's filled with little cards that have been written to our church. Lonnie spends a bit of time every single week, one day or more than one day at Oscar J. Pope Elementary School. If you don't know where that is, it's just across the street, maybe a mile or a mile and a half from here. And the reason why Lonnie goes and spends time on that campus is because when we decided to be in this location, something that was important to our pastors, our team, our core team, our board members was wherever we're planted, that's where we're meant to grow. But not just in terms of people, leave it in their hands. And I'm just not convinced that education and the amount of hours that kids and teachers and admin spend at school is meant to be completely on their own. So we as a church have believed that a large part of our mission is to make sure that a few schools around us know that there are a group of people out there who are saying it's not just on you. So Lonnie invests hours at Oscar J. Pope Elementary. Tori invests time at Lakeland Highlands Middle School. Mitchell invests time at Southwest Middle School. I do as well. Brooklyn and I together coach the Lakeland High School women's beach volleyball team, which is in season right now. We'd love for y'all to come watch a match. We have one on Tuesday at Florida Southern, Wednesday at Florida Southern, and Friday at Florida Southern if you want to come out and watch us dominate some other teams. Can't promise that, but I think we will. But I want to share something with you. There are cards out there that the students, the actual students, have written to you. Like they've taken their time to write a letter to you to say thank you for what ways we invest in their school. And I also have a letter right here from a lot of their teachers and staff. I'm not going to read everything on here that everybody says, but it's a card that says, the nice things you do are always appreciated. Thank you so much for your thoughtfulness. The staff and students of OJP appreciate your support and encouragement. So I want to say thank you to everybody here who believes in a church that says it's not just about what happens in this room. It's about the impact that we can have in many, many other rooms that exist in buildings all around us here in Lakeland. So will you put your hands together for the people who invest the time and provide the support? Whew. All right. Well, I've been talking about how since the new year, every new year, most of us who are alive and breathing, what happens is something gets triggered in us. And we turn the calendar and we start looking ahead. But in a way, we look back. And what happens to us is as we look forward, we're really interested in how can my life bring in an ounce of better health or some kind of well-being in my life? How do I grow that? We all get this energy that comes up inside of us that says, you know what, it's time to meet some needs that have been neglected. It would be good for you this year to fulfill yourself and to find ways to experience more enjoyment in life. And so what we often do at the new year is we have a tendency to set goals. Most of you by now have given up on your goals. That's just statistically. But most of us are thinking, what can I do different this year than what I did last year? And so we make commitment to ourselves. This year is going to be different. Because so many of us find this rising up in us that we want to work towards some level of positive change in this new year. But the problem is so many of us experience just not enough change that we're hoping for. And that brings up the question, why? Why, if we want it so bad, do we experience it so little? And that's why I've been doing this study that I've been doing, because there's something that I have noticed, something that I believe is one of the dominant reasons the majority of us, when we get to this stage in our year and we think that life is going to change and we give all this energy to it and it doesn't, I have come across what I believe is one of the reasons, maybe the dominant reason, it doesn't happen for all of us. And that's because we don't feel able to access a core of how God put us together as human beings. And so I've given a title to this study. It's like an 8-week study, so you'd have to go back and listen to all the other sermons in order to put it all together. But I've given a title to this study, and the title of the study is Permission to Feel. And the big idea behind this study is that God made us. This important. This is a theological concept. God as creator made us, and God made us with intention. And through intentionality, God made us with emotions. And God made us with those emotions to do something good for us, to draw us away from danger and to drive us toward growth and change and put us on the path to the healing that we all long for. And so last week I talked about the emotion of joy. And this week I'm going to talk about the emotion of fear. So when it comes to fear, there's this belief that many of us hold, and we don't know that we hold it, but there's this belief with fear that you can't be present with it and be able to do what it is that you need to do, especially if you need to do it well or effectively. We're kind of taught that fear needs to go away. As an example, I want you to think about public speaking. Public speaking is something that most people are terrified to even consider. So the majority of people in your lifetime, you will avoid any possibility of you standing in front of people, whether it's a large group or a small group, and giving them a speech. So this is interesting. If I had $1 every time somebody said to me, I could never do what you do every week on Sunday, I would have enough money to pay a bonus to our staff whenever they get up here and preach on my behalf. But I don't. And then there's this other question that I'm often hearing from people in relationship to my career and my job as a pastor. They will say to me, before you get up to preach, do you feel nervous? And the answer is yes. Every time before I come up to preach, I feel a little bit of some nervousness inside of me. Like I'm wondering, like, how am I going to do this again? And the fear that I feel in my nerves that's kind of rattling a little bit is, am I going to be good enough? Like, what if I mess up? What if I say something that embarrasses myself? And I am from Southeast Ohio, so I will say things in ways that embarrass myself. All of you like to remind me how I cannot pronounce correctly, according to your standard, the word C-O-L-O-R. I'm not going to say it because I don't want judgment. But there are moments, even when I'm speaking, where I'm wondering, like, how am I just going to say the word in a way that could embarrass me or make me feel like I can't put it together well enough for you to want to engage with what I'm saying? If it came down to me that I had to ditch all fear that I experience as a prerequisite for me delivering a sermon to you every week, then I would have to quit. Because I have never found a way how to make fear go completely away. And I think it's because what society tells us is that you need to get rid of fear. And if you can't get rid of fear, then you need to get away from whatever situation you're in or you may be in. But what I see in the gospel story is that Jesus does something very different. Jesus doesn't avoid situations where there is this emotion of fear. Jesus engages those moments. And in doing that, Jesus gives voice to the value of this emotion that he gives to us. So if you go to the Gospel of Luke chapter 8, you will find Jesus honoring the emotion of fear that a woman is feeling even as her body is physically trembling. And what we find in the story is that her fear doesn't exclude her from connection with God. It's actually the thing that brings her into a relationship with him that provides her some sense of safety and protection. And so what I want to do today is I want to study this gospel story together with you as a guide for you to hopefully see how the emotion of fear is meant to play out in your own story. So go with me to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 8, and we're going to read starting with verse 40. Let me get to it. It says, now, when Jesus returned, if you know anything about the gospel stories, you know that Jesus is always traveling. When Jesus returned, the crowd welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him. Just then there came a man named Jairus, a leader of the synagogue. He fell at Jesus' feet and begged him to come to his house, for he had an only daughter, about 12 years old, who was dying. As he went, the crowds pressed in on Jesus. Now, there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. And though she had spent all she had on physicians, no one could cure her. She came up behind him and touched the fringe of his clothes, and immediately her hemorrhage stopped. Then Jesus asked, "Who touched me?" When all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the crowds surround you and press in on you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me, for I noticed that power had gone out from me." When the woman saw that she could not remain hidden, she came trembling. And falling down before him, she declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. And Jesus said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go, but in peace." Peace and rest isn't something that this woman experienced often. The way this translation that I have used and read to you describes her physical struggle with her body as a hemorrhage. A better way of getting you to understand what's happening is that she was bleeding and it wouldn't stop. And as a woman in a culture, and we don't know her age, and I'll get to that in a moment, but a woman in a culture where your body is very valuable to everybody else around you, it actually is a lot of the way that you end up being offered by others in society a sense of safety. Like your body is something that is valuable to the men in society because you're the one who can bring them the furtherance of your family. And so a woman whose body isn't functioning the way that it's supposed to puts a woman in a position of great vulnerability. Because what man in a society that values what a woman brings in childbirth or childbearing is going to look at this woman who has an issue that will prevent her from that? Something else that's interesting is that in the Bible, when you see somebody in this first century struggling with something which we would call like a health concern, it wasn't just a health concern for those who existed in the first century. They also tied that health concern to a spiritual concern. So not only will she lose her value in relationship to men who should be offering themselves to her as a way of protecting her and bringing her into their home, now the church is going to look at her and say, you have this thing that is not going away, so you are impure, so not able to even come into our community and the collection of who we are. So this is a woman who would be put out by most human beings, especially men, including her family, as well as the religious people. So peace and rest is not what she knows. She knows exclusion. She knows shame. She knows exposure. And so when Jesus says to her to go in peace, that would have been a surprise to everybody. Even a surprise to her, but what a blessing. And so I want to make sense of a couple different groups of people in this story that we find who are dealing with fear. It's not just her, but I'm going to focus on her. In this story, what we're told is that Jesus has just returned from traveling to another country, which is the country of the Gerasenes. And it tells us that while he's there in this country, he encounters a man who is possessed by demons. And it says that Jesus commands the demons to come out of this man. And then it tells us that the demons negotiate with Jesus. Well, if you're going to command us to come out, then we want to choose where we get to go. And so Jesus gives the demons permission to go into a herd of pigs. And then those herd of pigs who are now possessed by demons run off a cliff into a lake and they drown. And that's where Jesus is returning from. Now, while this is happening in this moment where Jesus is in this particular area of the world, everybody hears about what he's just done. And they're curious, what just happened? And so they go out to investigate this thing that they've heard in their homes has happened to this man. And so when they go out and they see this man no longer possessed by demons, in verse 35, it tells us that they were afraid. Why would they be afraid that a man who once had demons no longer has demons? Wouldn't you be relieved? But in this case, it says that they were afraid. They felt fear. And not really knowing what to do with their fear, it says that they asked Jesus to leave, for they were seized with great fear. So Jesus leaves. I want you to notice, when they felt fear, they felt the need to get rid of it. And how they got rid of it was by getting rid of Jesus. They don't give Jesus the opportunity to attend to the fear that they are experiencing. So Jesus leaves, and Jesus, goes somewhere else. And when he arrives to where his destination is, there's a crowd of people who welcome him. I don't know how much you have read in the Gospels, but everywhere Jesus goes, it's like the crowds show up because everybody wants something from Jesus. Very few are there to really follow him. They're hoping to get something out of him. And so these crowds show up. And among the crowds, there's this leader of the synagogue who shows up and approaches Jesus and tells Jesus, my only daughter, who's 12 years old, is losing her life. Please come to our house and help her. She's my only daughter. And so as Jesus is walking on the way to the leader of the synagogue's house, it tells us that the crowds are pressing in on Jesus. And among the swarm of people, we learn about this woman, a vulnerable woman who is hoping to find some help. So I want you to catch a detail with me. The same year that daughter was born, which was 12 years ago, is the same year that this woman started dealing with this issue of chronic bleeding. 12-year-old daughter, 12 years of dealing with this issue. And this woman is coming to Jesus. And it tells us that somehow she makes it through the sea of people. I don't know how many crowds you all go around. I know there are some extroverts in the room who you like a crowd, like you're looking for a crowd. When you see a crowd, you run toward it. Some of you do. And then I have other people looking at me in the room like I run away from the crowd. I don't want to go into a crowd. I stay away from it. Probably some of the most crowded places I've been to have been sporting events. It's like trying to get into the dang sporting event. Everybody's waiting in line. Disney World's the same way. I have no clue why people get in line so early at Disney World before the park has even opened. Sometimes they'll let you in like an hour before the rides open and people have already formed a 2-hour line. Like that means some of you are gonna be waiting for 3 hours to get onto this ride. I can't figure it out. I go away from those kinds of crowds. Right here across the street is McKeel Middle School, and I'm amazed by what time people show up to get into car line in the afternoon. And if that's you, I am not judging you. I'm just curious how you think you're saving time when you show up at noon and school doesn't get out until 2:30. I promise you can wait in line and save yourself hours in your day. But some of us, we go toward a crowd. Some of us, we go away from a crowd. I hate going toward the crowd because I don't want to have to make my way through the crowd. I had a family member who went to New York City on New Year's Eve, which to me would be like the closest thing to hell on earth. Like, why in the world would you go to New Year's Eve in New York City? And my family member told me that when they went there, that you have to get there really early in the morning. And everybody starts to show up, and you get there early to get the spot that you want. But by the time it gets to the afternoon, all the areas are filled up. And I said to my family member, well, how do you eat? That's important. But more importantly, what do you do when it's time to relieve yourself? Like, what do you do? And my family member's like, you can't leave. I'm like, okay, then what do you do? And you all can, in your own imagination, wonder what that person does. And my point is, it is hard to get through a crowd. And to get through a crowd, you really have to want to get somewhere. You have to. And this woman wants to get to Jesus, and somehow she makes it through this crowd, and she gets close enough to touch the edge of Jesus' clothes. But the story doesn't tell us. Why would she reach out and touch his clothes? We don't know. It doesn't tell us. We're not inside her mind. We can't know her thoughts, but we can imagine that maybe she has heard the rumors that if you touch the fringe of a religious leader's garments, then it may hold some power. That's maybe what she's heard, but we don't know. Whatever reason she reaches out to try to touch Jesus, what we know is that her bleeding stopped. And also what we know is that when that happens, Jesus turns around and he's like, who touched me? I don't know. Some of you who have kids, sometimes when you're with your kids and you reach out to just say hey to them, sometimes they do that. My kids, they're like, who touched me? Like, why are you touching me? Like, what's going on here? Do you need something from me? And Jesus turns around, he's like, who touched me? And his disciples are like, I think a little bit nervous that maybe one of them did it. And they're like, but Jesus, there's so many people around. How are we going to know who touched you? Can you imagine the fear that woman must have felt? She reached out and touches this man, and her bleeding stops for the first time in 12 years. And she's thinking, I did it. And the person that she touches turns around and says, who did that? Like, who touched me? Because she has no idea what Jesus might do or what his disciples might do if they discover that it's her. I think maybe some of you in this room, you've had moments when you were kids that you can reflect back on, and you had an adult say to you in your life, or maybe a group of you in your life when you were kids, who did that? Like you all were doing something. Somebody got in trouble. Maybe you and your siblings pulled a fire alarm. That's happened to Brooklyn in her lifetime when she was a kid. Who did that? Like who pulled the fire alarm? Who spilled the milk on the carpet and tried to eat the cereal before it got too soggy? Like who did that? I'm sure you had a moment in your life as a kid when something happened and somebody wanted to know who was an adult who did that. When I was a kid learning to drive a riding lawnmower, I accidentally ran over the downspout. And it just makes me laugh in a way that I was a young kid, like couldn't wait to ride on a lawnmower. It was John Deere, not like the ones today that are zero turn that go as fast as a car. Like this was a very slow, very large John Deere riding lawnmower. And you had to be so many pounds to be able to sit on the seat to activate the engine. Like you couldn't weigh like a less amount and be able to, and I couldn't wait until I weighed enough. And if you could look back at pictures of me growing up, my parents either starved me or I just didn't like their food because I didn't have a lot of weight on my body. I was very skinny growing up, like bones sticking out of my knees. And so when I played basketball, I wore knee pads like volleyball players. And my family likes to make fun of me, and my kids and my wife like, look at you, why were you wearing knee pads? It's because I was so skinny. I couldn't wait to get to the day when I could sit on that seat and weigh enough for the engine to engage. And so when I finally did, I was riding around my grandpa's property, proud that he would give me permission to do it, and I accidentally backed over the drain pipe. And it was plastic, and I crushed it. And so I could still feel in my body as I went back into my grandpa's gun and bait shop, like terrified that he's gonna know that I did this. I can still feel like the nervousness in my body as I walk back in, and my grandpa says, who did that? Well, he knows I'm the only person out there riding on this riding lawnmower, so he must have noticed the fear on my face. He didn't need to say who did that. There was no way for me to hide it. And there's no way for this woman, really, she realizes, for her to hide what she's done. So she approaches Jesus, and her fear tells her to fall down before him and explain to him why she's done what she's done. So I want you to notice what her fear leads her to experience. When she falls down on her knees before Jesus, that's when Jesus says to her, your faith has made you well. The opposite of what she could have done is, my fear is too much. I need to get rid of it, so I better get out of this situation. Instead, she trusted Jesus with her fear. She stayed with it. And in staying in the situation, Jesus says, what great faith you have, that you would come before me and trust yourself with me. Your faith, woman, to stay with your fear has made you well. Go, not in danger. Go in peace. Isn't that amazing to anybody in this room? That she felt so much fear, but it was in feeling it that she found the freedom that she was looking for. Jesus honors this vulnerable human being's emotion that has come to the surface. And I want you to notice how without feeling that fear, she would not have been able to follow its God-given wisdom. Wisdom that so wisely put her in a posture that was asking for Jesus' protection. And Jesus honors that fear that he sees her feeling, which shows us the purpose that fear plays out in making her well. Feeling fear doesn't exclude her from connection with Jesus. It actually opens the door for her to step into it. So by God's design, what we get to see is that fear helps us move toward protection and away from danger. Fear isn't meant to make you stop short of doing what you need to do or are called to do. It's meant to help you anticipate and perceive how you can do it in a way that leads to growth, healing, and change in your life. But here's the thing. Most of our fears in the present are based on fears that we have known in the past. Most of our fears that we have in the present are based on fears that we have known in the past. Another way I can say that to you is your fears offer you insight into what you've been through. And based on what you've been through, you learned whether or not it was safe to feel this good emotion that God has given to you. And so what I want to say to you today is, based on the knowledge of your relationship to fear today, when you feel fear emerge, I want you to get curious about how you felt it in the past. Because based on this woman, start to notice fear. Do you try to get rid of it? Or do you trust it? Do you trust it with a God who says, if you bring your fear to me, I'm going to offer you protection? And there's been so many moments in my life when I have thought, oh man, this is too scary. I don't want to do this. I'm guessing many of you feel that with your job sometimes. I think I'm not alone. That in your job you're thinking, can I really take this on? Or is my boss going to get rid of me because? Or I need to tell my colleague something that needs to be said, but what's going to happen if I do? Or the way that the world is going, is it going to affect my reality? Like, I don't think I'm the only one. You know, when we became a church, when people came up to me when we were at another church and we were meeting on a Saturday night, and people came up and said, hey, we don't know what we're going to do because Saturday night's going to end. And I was like, that's a great question. You're going to have to figure that out on your own. And then people were, well, can you do something? And I'm like, what? And like, can you do a Saturday night church so that maybe we can continue that? And as you all know now, we're only on Sunday morning, but in that moment, my heart told me, don't do it. Like, it's too scary. But there were a group of people, Brooklyn, my family, those who love me, who came around me and said, if you try it, we're going to be right here with you in it. And fear that I know in the past is, I don't know that I can get through the fear on my own, because what if it doesn't work out? Like, what if it doesn't succeed? What if it doesn't happen? What if these things go bad? What am I going to do? So fear in my past would tell me, don't do it. Just shy away. Go in the opposite direction. Find something else that's a whole lot more certain. When we were first married, Brooklyn and I had 2 job opportunities. One was to be a server, where I had never done that before and was worried, like, what if I don't get tips? Versus a job working in a factory, 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, with a mandatory 8-hour shift on Saturday, 58 hours a week. Fear told me, take the certainty. Worst 3.5 months of my life. I don't know what God is calling you into. I don't know what opportunities are in front of you. I have no idea what challenges you are facing. I'm not sure the kind of healing that you're hoping for. I don't know how long you've been walking around with something that you say to yourself, I wish this thing wasn't a part of my reality. I have no idea what your life is like or where you are in your story, but what I am certain of is that what Jesus says to us in the gospel stories is when you feel fear, don't shy away from it. Lean into it, but lean into it in the presence of a God who always offers comfort. And then place yourself in the presence of other human beings who will tell you the same thing that God wants you to know about God. And that is, we will not leave you. We will not forsake you. Even if this thing doesn't work out, we're not going to abandon you. Because my fear is for all of us is that we don't step into all that we're meant to step into because we're afraid. If that woman had been afraid and tried to get rid of her fear, she never would have been healed. Stand with me today. Here's my challenge for all of you. This is a big challenge. And whenever I give you a challenge, it's meant to take my message and give you a chance to apply it in the week. Something that moves you forward with the thoughts that you've had through like an activity that you can do often. And so my challenge for you is to write a story about fear in your past, to actually write a story. And I know some of you are like, I don't write, but maybe you can type. And some of you say, I don't have computers, so you're allowed to write. But I challenge you to write a story where fear played a significant role in an event that has taken place. And so I know some of you are thinking, I don't know how to write a story. I don't know how to do that. So don't worry. I've thought ahead and I've provided a resource for you. I want to help you know how to write this story. And so if you would like to have that resource to know how to write a story about fear in your past so that maybe we can start to make sense of why and how you deal with it in the present, then you can text the word story with the number that you see on the screen and it will send that resource to you. So as I pray today, here's my prayer for you, that you wouldn't try to get rid of the fear, but you would trust it with Jesus and the people who are the face of Jesus to you and your life. Let's pray. God, I think very few of us would be like that woman unless we were so desperate. And I'm not sure that we would make our way through the crowd, but if we did, I'm wondering how many of us would be willing to then stay with the fear by staying in the situation rather than run away from it. But God, that's who we want to be. We want to be people who, as we look forward into this year, even though we're afraid, we trust in you to be with us, to settle us, and to give us confidence that even though there are things that are scary, in your care, you will give us safety and protection. So God, help us to step into some new things this year. In your name we pray. Amen.